there. A more drastic but hugely appealing idea was that the masses might be somehow scientifically controlled so as to weed out the weak and the degenerate. And in the early years of the 20th century, it seemed that science might turn that dream into reality. Darwin's theory of natural selection inspired his cousin, Francis Galton, to come up with a new science that was also a system of social engineering, and he called it eugenics. And am I right that there are really two aspects to eugenics? One is encouraging the right people to breed by sort of tax breaks and so on. The other, of course, is stopping the degenerates breeding. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. And of course, it's pretty clear who the eugenicists thought they were amongst. They were the right people. And it's remarkable that Galton himself had no children. And I think that was part, perhaps, of the pressure to write his book. But it's also pretty clear it's much easier to identify somebody else as worse than you than better than you.
Galton harnessed new technologies in order to develop a coherent theory of eugenics. He thought that if he could isolate the common characteristics of criminals, then they could be identified by their looks alone. His composite photographs overlaid many different portraits in order to find the archetypal criminal face, producing some strange yet fascinating results.
You've got to give him his due. He was, in his own way, a very talented scientist, and he was, in his own way, right in the beginnings of modern anthropology. I mean, he was interested overwhelmingly in human difference, some of which might manifest itself in criminality. But he wrote, for example, a paper on the relative sensitivity of men and women at the nape of the neck, where he tickled a lot of men and tickled a lot of women and see which one giggles more. And that sounds silly, but it's a thing you can measure. And famously, he was one of the very first people to use fingerprints, and he accumulated a large collection of fingerprints. And he measured height and weight and hand grip and hair color. So he was quite a sensible anthropologist. I think Galton set an agenda in Victorian times which really flowered in Edwardian times. So you can blame him for a lot, really.
Was it mainly intellectuals that it attracted, eugenics?
Eugenics, I think it attracted most people. You can see it throughout fiction, of course, in the 19th and early 20th century. And simply because it seemed to be a law of nature. It seemed obvious that in an era of progress, where the most progressive races, the white English middle class, were leading the world, it seemed obvious that that was somehow inborn, and if that were the case, we needed to know about it, and if we knew about it, in fine Edwardian fashion, we needed to do something about it.
But all this would lead to a more sinister fantasy. What if it were possible to go one step further and not just prevent the masses from breeding, but eliminate them altogether?
Looking back with hindsight, these guys knew nothing, well, almost nothing, but they were entirely confident about what they should do. Terrible things, as we would now say, in the eugenics sense. There's an absolutely crystal clear link between the eugenics movement of the Edwardian times and the concentration camps. I mean, people like to poo-poo that as being a simplistic argument, but it isn't. Hitler took human genetics textbooks to the Landsberg prison when he was imprisoned. So I think terrible things happened as a result of Edwardian eugenics later, but if you put yourself into an Edwardian mindset, it would be a very obvious attitude to take.
It was H.G. Wells who gave most thought to the problem of exterminating the masses. Wells's New Republic will favour breeding amongst the healthy. In the past, he said, nature killed off the base and the servile, but in the future, the executioners in Wells's new republic will take over. They will have an ideal, he wrote, and that will make killing worth the while. Death for such people will mean merely, he said, the end of the bitterness of failure, the merciful obliteration of weak and silly and pointless things. George Bernard Shaw, like H.G. Wells, didn't flinch at the prospect of large-scale killing. Extermination, he said, must be put on a scientific basis if it's to be done humanely as well as thoroughly. If we want a certain type of civilization and culture, we must exterminate the people who don't fit in. Killing in H.G. Wells's New Republic would, he said, be done painlessly by administering lethal drugs. D.H. Lawrence, on the other hand, suggested a new way of getting rid of society's undesirables, which chillingly anticipates one of the 20th century's most momentous atrocities.
If I had my way, I'd build a lethal chamber as big as the Crystal Palace, with a military band playing softly and a cinematograph working brightly. Then I'd go out in the back streets and the main streets and bring them in, all the sick, the halt, and the maimed. I would lead them gently, and they would smile me a weary thanks. And the band would softly bubble out the Hallelujah chorus.
Lawrence wrote this in 1908. Just 30 years later, Hitler's gas chambers went into operation. The solutions proposed by the cultural elite were shocking, but the concerns they faced haven't gone away. We still think high art's superior, and there are still many people who feel excluded by it. Like the Edwardians, we still fear that true culture can't survive in a world saturated with worthless mass media. We cling superstitiously to the belief that genuine art must be alienating or difficult. But to say that one kind of art is more valuable than another is in the end the same as saying that one kind of person is more valuable than another. And that is the path to inhumanity.